Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. But I have been on a side trek talking about the Zettelkasten, how I use it in my research, how it evolved over the couple of years that I've been at it, about 2.5 years working on my Zettelkasten, and the role that it plays for me, and the methods that I have evolved to try to make it easier and more approachable for a creative mindset instead of a scientific mindset. Well, today I received a really interesting collection of questions from Alex, and Alex has asked interesting questions in the past that have inspired videos, and today's was also in that vein. And he talks about uh, what the role of directory cards might be for me, and noting that my directory cards changed over the time. And he wants to know whether or not they would play into his concept of having an index into discussions, which I thought was a really fascinating topic when he brought it up earlier. And what role do directories have in approaching those conversations? And did my old or my new style come closer to that concept of reaching into a conversation? So that's going to be the subject of my podcast tonight. But he also asked a question about my people box and how I use my people box. And I will answer that before we get going on the cards. Right now, my people box contains my personal addresses, but when it relates to strictly to my Zettelkasten, it's sources, whether it's a book or an article or a video, and then also separately quotes. It might be meeting notes if it's this person that I have a business relationship with, but I don't have anything beyond basically quotes and things the person has written or said. So if you have other ideas on that, I would be interested in hearing what your thoughts are on people boxes, Alex. So without further ado, I am going to show you how my directory system evolved. You're going to see 3 different styles of directories and a series of evolutions in my numbering as I kept working for what is the simplest and easiest way to number cards. So let's take a look at those directories. I'll switch over to my down-facing camera. Okay, here we are where we can look at some cards. Now, what you're going to see here is my old style of directories and my earliest philosophy on directories. I've been working with my Zettelkasten for 2.5 years, and for about 1 year, I avoided card numbering, individual card numbering altogether, because it left me so flummoxed. And I have a background in math and computer science, so you wouldn't think that would have happened, but it did. So what I've got here to show you is a section. It's not the entire 3B section, because this 3B1 is quite large. So this is just the 3B2, and maybe not even the whole 3B2. But what I wanted to show you the way I used to do directories and the way I used to do my card numbering. Early on, when I was really unwilling to face card numbering, I used a system that I called clumps and dividers. A clump, for me, was a group of cards that related to the title on the divider. And the cards themselves didn't necessarily have to be related to one another, as long as they related to the title, which in this case, coincidentally enough, is Zettelkasten cluster, which is what this would represent, a cluster. And I had this idea that an immature cluster would have perhaps only 3 cards, 1, 2, 3, and they all relate to the same theme, but they haven't shaped up yet into any kind of ideas. Now, the other thing that went along with this early days was I didn't so much have the concept that every main card had to have something of myself on it. That's an absolute for me right now. I would not even consider creating a main card without putting something of myself on it. But back in those days, I would very often simply make the note from the source, and that was that. And then I plunked it in to the appropriate divider. But I didn't just drop it in. I had a method. I always sorted them. Whenever I added a new card, I evaluated them and I just arranged them in physical order. And every card contained the number on the divider. Well, you can see with these cards, that isn't the case. These cards all have separate numbers, 1A, 1B, 1C. But when I transitioned away from this clumps and dividers and decided that every card needed a number, I had to go back through what was about 3 boxes of cards at the time, maybe 2.5, 3 boxes of cards. And I had to visit every card and give it an individual number. And what was more, I had to visit every index entry and extend the numbers on the index entry. In fact, that's the thing that made the clumps and dividers method unworkable for me, is that every time as these clumps grew and grew and grew, when I had like 12 or more cards in a clump, I would divide it. And then every one of those cards, you had to go back to the index entry and extend the number. So that became quite burdensome. And the cost of even of printing these, the cost of all these divider cards was getting to be a little ridiculous as well. So when I didn't just systematically sit down and renumber all my cards, that would have driven me crazy. Instead, what I did was whenever I added a new card to a clump, I gave numbers to every card in that clump. And that made it something that I was always interested in because I just added a new card, so I could spread out the work and make it interesting. And then to indicate that it had gotten the treatment of individual numbers, I put a dot at the end of it to know, okay, that one's mature now. Well, there are still a few, darn few, in my system, but guess what? Right in this same area, I came upon this immature cluster, 3B2C-3, physical objects in a Zettelkasten, and both cards have the same number, 3B2C-3. And there's no dot. This one did not get the treatment yet. One of the cards delineates all the symbols that I use on my index cards. And the other one was talking about, well, how could I come up with dividers more cheaply? Well, I could, get a poster board, but they were too thick. And, well, maybe I would get a pack of cardstock and cut my own. But that didn't turn out to be very handy either because you only really got 2 cards per sheet of cardstock. So that didn't last very long. So it was actually 2 things that started driving me away from that approach. So let me show you what dividers looked like in those days. Now the dividers did not change until when I switched from giving each card its own individual number, the dividers didn't have to change. So this is an example of what the dividers looked like under this system. For example, here's 3B. And 3B originally began just as surprise. And then the interesting thing was the first card that I ever got about the Zettelkasten was a card that had to do with surprise. So then it fit very well here. And then as the cards started accumulating, everything I knew about Zettelkasten ended up in this 3B clump. And I eventually added the word Zettelkasten to the clump. And then when it became, quote, mature, I split it into two sections. Surprise itself, that original element, and then the Zettelkasten split off. And the Zettelkasten part quickly grew much faster. So here's my next card, the 3B2. For a while, 3B2 was my clump, and the cards all accumulated in 3B2. Well, eventually it got too fat, and it had to be subdivided, and here's all the sections that it got subdivided into. 3B2A, B, C, D, E. Communication tool. By then I was already looking for a simplified Zettelkasten. How might a simplified Zettelkasten be structured? Some notes on the hand-mind connection, which relates to the value of a analog Zettelkasten. And then finally this information on Scott Schepper's concept of a neo-intellectual life. Well, now I'm going to pick on one of those, 3B2C, and show you how that evolved. This is structure of a simplified Zettelkasten. Now my structure of a simplified Zettelkasten grew and grew and grew, and eventually it had to be subdivided into 5 sections. And that's the way it went. They would grow and then subdivide. And then as it subdivided, I came up with a description of what fit the cards that were left in those clumps. So it was a very discovery based, but top down. So the next style of Zettelkasten that I had was based more on the Scott Schepper. After I had basically gotten all of my cards, or pretty darn close to all of my cards, given an individual number, I decided to go back one weekend. I went back and rewatched all of the Scott Schepper videos on card numbering. I faced it and I figured it out. I thought, okay, I'm not going to use the slashes because my ones look like slashes and I can't tell ones from slashes. So I used dots and I devised my own set of categories, and I came up with the idea of making nested directory cards. And what that did for me was that it gave me the sense that a directory functions sort of like a file folder. And so if I had cards that were matching colors, I could sense better what was enclosed in each. For example, here's card 5100, organizing a note box. And it goes, this whole thing is on 5100. Well, at the end, I would have another card marking the end of organizing a note box. Let's take a look at 5140, for example. Well, it's not a very big one. It's the beginning and the end are right next to each other. But what I ended up then was having directories for the highest level, and then as those got broken down into sub-levels, and as those got broken down into finer sub-levels, and then I even felt like I needed more levels below that, and I came up with the concept of the topic. And with a topic card, I would use 0.01 or 0.02 and declare topics, which took me, that way I could have any number of topics in a given section. I would just number them 0.01, 0.02. And that kind of worked for a while, but as you may discover here, the real cards are white and the directory cards are colored. And you may be beginning to see the nature of the problem that we had here. The clump of cards was predominantly colored cards. And it's got to the point where it was hard to find the main cards buried in amidst all the directory cards. So, well, that was taking things a little too far in the other direction. You see, I have to make every mistake before I get things figured out. So this was the last precursor to the way I'm doing it now with the effortless numbering system and letting the directory take care of the biggest problem that caused all of the complexity in the Scott-Shepherd system of numbering, and I've seen it in other numbering systems as well, which is the concept of having to micromanage the cards that fall under a particular directory. So I'm going to take as an example one of the directories from my old style 3B2C4, and here's the old style of directories. They were in the clump 3B2C4 note card types in a Zettelkasten. And after I did my work on them, every card had its own number. And they went from -4 was the first one, then 4A, C, all the way down to 4H. So there's quite a number of cards. Under my new directory structure, you see there's no detail on this one. My new one would say, well, wait a second here. This is card 4. 4A belongs directly with 4. So does 4B. So does 4C. 4E. All of these cards belong directly under this one card. How do you reflect that? I reflect that now with a directory card, because to me, this is the card that really gets conversations going. It's not the old directory card, it's the new one, because now we have something really interesting and useful. This was the 4C was the notes are paper memory, and all the pieces that came under them were all the types of note cards that I encountered in Shepherd's system and also in the work of Zettelkasten. So I ended up with quite a collection of types of note cards, and I love the fact that now all of these are present at the same time with its parent note. And this is how things start to become conversations. Now, some of these cards go deeper, and then that's fine. It can go very, very deep. But always I will have this directory will tell me about the conversation, about what kinds of notes might you have in a Zettelkasten. And that's a pretty interesting conversation, even given that these cards were for the most part made during a time when I did not put anything of myself on the card. I simply made a note of what I had learned. Sometimes I did, but not regularly. But still, even with that limitation, even with the fact that these are not evocative taglines that bring back the whole card, even so, they're valuable. And the directories that I've been making lately that are directories of taglines are turning out to be those very directories into a conversation. But the interesting thing, and this is what Alex brings to the table and why I was so excited about his concept of having a directory into a conversation, because when I look up this 3B2C-4 card, it has indeed been indexed, but it's only indexed under notes, paper, and memory. There's nothing there that tells me that this is the lead card of a really interesting discussion. And I think that concept of having a directory of conversations is as a distinct edition. And I like it very much, and I'm starting to collect those as well. So thank you, Alex. Okay, so that is how my directory structure has evolved. I do think my new system is far more powerful than anything that I've used before. What I wanted to say and emphasize is that, Alex, thank you so much for bringing up this additional concept of a directory of discussions, because I do not have anything directly in my index that points to this card, because this is not officially a part of my card. But it's a very important one, because these directories do turn out to be exactly that. They're discussions. And so perhaps it would be interesting to have a directory of discussions, or maybe some symbology um, and maybe just an added symbolism to this guy that would tell you that that it's a lead of a discussion. So I really appreciate the ideas. I'm trying to be very exploring here, because I'm working diligently to find the simplest possible way of keeping a Zettelkasten without letting the keeping of the Zettelkasten take over. So that you get all of the benefits of the Zettelkasten without any of the drudgery, without any of the confusion, without any of the, oh, am I doing it right? And yet confidently, simply, effortlessly to be able to build your Zettelkasten. And I think it's coming pretty close. And so I do appreciate the comments that you folks come up with. Um, styles of numbering that are easier to read. Okay. I'm at least contented with this. But if you can show me another system that's easier to read, boy, show me. I'll be happy to. I would love to see it. So keep your comments coming. You are helping to shape what's going on here, and you're helping, hopefully, to shape another generation of people who are going to use the Zettelkasten, because that's one of the things I want to do, is help the Zettelkasten concept reach more people. And that means dropping some of the barriers that are kind of needlessly thrown up currently. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.